Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Live Show. We'll be here 5 days a week, 11 a.m. Eastern. But obviously, if you miss the show, you can always catch the replay on RotoWire YouTube. During the preseason, I am taking Thursdays and Fridays off. So the other days, we're going at it. All right, if you've been liking the show, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. I'd appreciate it greatly. And the bosses will know the show is valuable to you, and it helps me out a lot. So thank you if you can help. Also, if you're not following me on the X or Twitter at Jim Coventry NFL, I'd be greatly appreciative as well. I do post player threads 5 to 7 a week in the preseason. Today, I wrote one up on Alvin Kamara. So hopefully that's an interesting read. Now, you can draft a fantasy football team with me, Jim Coventry, and let's do that for a charitable cause. We'll get to hang out on a video call. We'll talk football with each other. We'll bounce ideas off each other, and we'll draft a winning team. This is for the Pros with Joes. And so it's a great charitable organization. So see if you can win that spot. Sign up. Just go to my Twitter profile at Jim Coventry NFL. It's pinned to the top. Donation page is there. And then they, the company that runs this, they pick the winner of who gets a draft with me. Hopefully we're drafting together. Finally, stay tuned to the end of the show. Darren Armani from Fantasy Mojo. That's my go-to for ADP. He'll be on to talk about players he's targeting in 2023 fantasy football drafts. All right, news of the day. So good news for Cooper Kupp with that hamstring. He said during Saturday's preseason game against the Raiders, he intends to take part in practice Wednesday and Thursday. So this is a good couple weeks before the season starts. So Cooper Kupp right now, based on how you felt about him before the injuries, he looks like he'll be cleared of that. Currently, he's going Fantasy Mojo ADP last 3 days, wide receiver for pick 6. So that's where he's going. Earlier in the preseason, I was getting him around 8. And people were like, oh, well, you're the idiot. You're taking him before he's falling. But the market's gotten tighter on him. Now, here's the thing with Kupp. Even last year when he missed time, before then, he was the wide receiver 1 based on points per game. PPR, of course. Now, here's the problem. It's not just Kupp. It's not just maybe re-injury. It's not the fact he's 30. But we're hitching him to Matthew Stafford. Now, it's going to be Sean McVay's deal here because Stafford the last 2 years, neck injury, back injury. Those are 2 injuries you do not want to mess with because realistically, one wrong hit and it could be very, very bad for Stafford from an NFL football standpoint. So here's what you have to frame though. Sean McVay realizes this. Sean McVay became really, really reliant upon his passing game the last few years, including the Super Bowl year. It used to be where he had some very good run concepts in the game. And I know he had Todd Gurley, but the play design allowed them to have more balance, run versus pass. But McVay's gone away from that. Last year, their offensive line had some of the worst injury luck we've ever seen. Now, it's not a murderer's row of linemen, but it's not a bad line when they're all healthy, which we haven't seen. And then they draft Steve Avila with the 5th pick in the 2nd round. He's a big guard. And so I think there's a possibility that when McVay schemes this offense up, it's back to being more balanced. It's going to protect this quarterback. And we know that Kupp is unstoppable on those choice routes where he and Stafford, they read the leverage of the defense at the snap. And right before the initiation happens, Kupp knows which way the leverage is. He goes the opposite way. The ball is already there. That's what makes him unstoppable. And then the pre-thought out play, Stafford is getting the ball to where Kupp immediately is on the run in the space. So that is what really benefits her. So if you're taking that shot on Cooper Kupp, you are understanding there is concern with Stafford more than Kupp. But if McVay can get this ball out quickly, regularly, it really mitigates a lot of that risk. I do have time today for a couple questions today. Chris is in the house. David Montgomery or Dalvin Cook. David Montgomery should have a base floor of carries all year long. We love Jahmyr Gibbs. Receiving is where I think he makes his most hay. I think he'll get some, obviously, interior carries, but I think they don't want to burn him out inside, and Montgomery can handle the grinder carries. Montgomery will get you about 4 yards a carry. That's what we've seen out of him. He can break tackles, but he doesn't do much after that, but that's okay. I still think he'll get some red zone looks. To say he'll get 6 to 8 touchdowns, I think that's reasonable. Now, Dalvin Cook, I just heard on the Athletics podcast, and I listen to NFL podcasts, not fantasy podcasts, but the Athletic had beat writers on talking about camp. And their thought on Dalvin Cook was that Cook starts the season in a timeshare pretty even with Breece Hall. But if Breece Hall comes along as is hoped, that beat writer from the Jets expects that by week 8 or so, Hall is the guy. Cook is more of just a little change of pace. So I think if you subscribe to the beat writer from the Rams philosophy on how this shakes out, I think Montgomery is a better year-long player. Early in the season, Dalvin Cook is probably going to have more value. The franchise, the Jets, told us a lot by waiting on signing their free agent and then paying him $8 million, though. So that tells us they do have that. Uncle Ted's back in the house. Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson, late over. Yeah, for sure. Get those late plays. Right, there's risk in Cooper Kupp. There's no question there is risk. And what I say is, if you're in one of those jackpot leagues, right, that's where you go with Kupp maybe, because you got to be thousands of people. And if you need that guy who could be the wide receiver one. But like Uncle Ted says, there's a lot of risk there. So if you're in your regular 12-team league and you just want to, get high production, but be a little safer. Yeah, I think it makes a strong case for pass.com. Henry's in the house. Would I draft Diggs in the first round to pair with Josh? There's nothing wrong with pairing. I like how you use the word pairing, Henry, because the word stack gets common. Stack is 3 or more. I was talking about this at the Kings Classic Expo weekend, and it's right. When you pair a couple players on a high-powered offense, of course it's smart. It's very smart. So I absolutely do that. And then, all right, let's see who else we got. Let's get a couple here. Mr. Scampers, good morning. Get a couple quick ones. I got to get back to some business here. Jay Red's in the house. Thoughts on Etienne? So Etienne's interesting. We learned a lot about the potential usage for him last year. Well, so realistically, we saw week 7 or 8, I believe, he was getting 20-plus carries. And we're like, wow, we got this thing going. And then Doug Peterson really, really backed him off. And then there was a period like week 14 or 15 or so, he gave him another decent workload. And then he backed him off again. And then in the offseason, they first bring in Dearness Johnson, and then they draft Tank Bigsby. So to me, the writing's on the wall that they want to limit Etienne's carries. He's dynamic when he has the ball. I don't like that they didn't use him in the passing game. Doug Peterson has really not made it always in his coaching or an emphasis to throw to his backs. Etienne is so dangerous there, but he never had more than 3 receptions in a game. Now, if you are hopeful that Peterson will say, you know what, we've got to utilize this weapon in the passing game, Etienne could become a monster PPR performer. He's fine at ADP. He's going like in the 3rd round of 12-team leagues. That probably goes fine. Because remember, 5 yards to carry, 9 yards per reception. He's a dynamic player. So I think he is a good play at the 3rd round. So you're not overdrafting him there. So I think he's fine there. And I think the hope is you're going to get more upside if they use him more as a receiver. And then Henry, Dobbins or Akers. Dobbins he's been hurt, right? But he's a legit star. And this year with Todd Monken, I expect that there will be more 3 receiver sets. Now remember, the Ravens, they would run 22 personnel. They would have Patrick Ricard as a fullback. They'd have 2 tight ends. They would run this heavy personnel and predictable. Hard to stop, but predictable. And Dobbins was still getting us 6 yards per carry as a rookie, 5.7 off the ACL last year. Actually, 7.48 in his last 4 games, I think it was. So in 11 personnel now, if they spread the field at all with Lamar and the receivers, wow, Dobbins could explode. I like Akers this year. I'm going to talk about him later. But J.K. Dobbins could be crazy good. All right. Let's see. All right. So now we get back to business here. Let's see here. Devon Etienne, shoulder injury. So we don't know the prognosis yet, but right now we're optimistic he'll be fine, but we don't exactly know what's going on. With Etienne, he's 5'9", 188. Not super small. All right. He's not, he's decent size, but he's definitely not, a guy that's sturdy, right? And you always wonder when the size back comes into the league. You're probably looking, obviously, you're starting change of pace type. And you don't want these runners in between the tackles too frequently, because in this league you wear them out very quickly, and these explosive players, you want to keep them. But that word explosiveness brings me back to his pre-draft testing. His speed, of course, was dynamic, 95th percentile 40, but his explosiveness scores were 30th percentile. Those are the tests that show up your off the block speed, and that's where a lot of it goes. Now, the testing isn't always the final word, right? We know that. But if there is some merit to that, you get away with that in college. So we're going to have to keep an eye on this. But that's the only little concern. He's going as running back 37, pick 107 per Fantasy Mojo ADP. So that's where we get a little bit of nervousness or concern that he's going high. People are expecting a lot of touches. Now, he can force missed tackles. When he gets contacted, he has very good balance. And he can make those cuts. He doesn't lose speed. And he's that game breaker. So we love that. Now, his yards per carry in college, Etienne, we don't have the update yet, Brooks. Shoulder, we don't know yet. We're going to find out soon. We're hoping he's good. But definitive word I haven't seen. I was working the last half hour, so something broke, then I didn't see it yet. All right, so the yards per carry in college for Etienne went down each year. And in pass protection, he is legit horrible. So if they're going to use him on a passing down, unless some of the teams now are saying, you know what, hell with it. We got a good receiving back. We're just going to put him out in the pattern, and we're just going to deal with it. And that's possible. Now, one thing I saw, as good of a receiver is, he doesn't adjust to the ball well. And Tua last year, teams were flooding the middle of the field on him in the second half of the season, and they were daring him to win on the outside. But Etienne's going to do his work in the middle of the field where defenses are flooding. So there's a few little things that we have to worry about. Etienne is talented. I'm also worried about Mike McDaniel. Does he have a counter punch? Because last year, defenses started to try some different things, and we know Tua was hurt. There's a lot of moving parts, right? But he's going to have to come up with a counter punch, because the league is going to have some answers for what they were doing with the speed they have. Now, maybe the speed just wins, but they're just things to consider here. All right, let's see what else we got here. At RotoWire, we got something new for all the DFS players out there. We have that new and improved NFL DFS lineup optimizer. You can use about 30 different customization options to build winning lineups. Ours is a fraction of the cost of many of our competitors, the optimizers they have. Now, preseason and week one slates are now live. Be sure to check it out. One thing, Deuce Vaughn's getting some talk, and he scored in each of the 2 preseason games. So that always raises the buzz on a player. Now, his recent ADP, Fantasy Mojo, running back 68, pick 191. So in 16-player drafts, he's not getting drafted, but deeper drafts he is. His, just like Etienne, his explosiveness testing pre-draft was not good. For a 179-pound guy, 5'5", his explosive was only 53rd percentile. Now, that said, he can run a route tree. He can play in the slot. He is totally electric after the catch. When he gets in the open field, he's elusive. But here's the thing. As a running back, in college, you get away with bouncing it outside. You could definitely, these guys can outrun college guys. But if you can't fix that in the NFL, usually they get you. There's very few players that can win to the outside. His vision, his setup vision on runs is not great. And of course, at his size, he struggles to break tackles. So how might Dallas use him? And the thing is, if you're lining him up in the backfield, that really is minimizing his usage. So you'd like to see him as a slot receiver. But CeeDee Lamb does a lot of slot work. And now with Gallup and Brandon Cooks, I'm not moving CeeDee Lamb out of the slot in those 3 receiver sets. And so it just makes me wonder. I think Vaughn gets 3 to 5 touches a game. I think that's what he gets. Because in that offense, I don't know where they're going to slot him in. And that said, and the backup running back is going to take grinder carries because they're going to want to protect Tony Pollard as much as they can. So that's just my thought there. I think it's 191 picks. Okay, that's not a problem. All right, let's see what else we got. We're going to move to our next segment here. So the RotoWire Fantasy Football Draft Kit app has up-to-the-minute cheat sheet, news source. We all need that when we're going to draft them. If you're like me and you have tiers, I always use player tiers, right? Well, the app allows you to do that too. And you could check out and see why the RotoWire Fantasy Football Draft Kit app is the #1 ranked paid sports app in the Apple Store. All right, now this is going to be me talking a little crazy here for a while, but I'm going to give you some player analysis. The analysis is what matters. I titled the show 3 non-obvious running backs who can end up as the running back 1. I am not predicting that they end up as the RB1. What I'm basically pointing out for you is the upside case for 3 different players who are getting drafted outside the top 12 running backs. Okay. So the upside case for Najee Harris, who's being ranked as running back 13, pick 40. He's going after Joe Mixon. He's going after Ramondre Stevenson. Here's what I want you to know about Najee Harris. First of all, as a pure running back, he's not a great running back. Let's get that out and understand that right away. Now, last year, Najee Harris had that mysterious foot injury. I was surprised when the team let him practice and play in the preseason on that injured foot. To me, they have no concerns. Why would you risk a player in preseason, right? It wasn't until about 3 weeks ago I learned that Najee Harris had a steel plate inside of his shoe. Very, very difficult to run. And he kept that in his shoe through the first half of the season. So that explains a lot. Remember, in that up to that bye, the Steelers didn't give him more than 17 carries. They gave him a 15, a 17, and everything was less than that. After the bye, we started seeing the 20 carry games, the 22 carry games, 5 games after that bye, he had over 20 carries. To me, that tells me he was healthy. The plate was out of his shoe. He has all of his 80-yard rushing games. Now, of course, he had more attempts in those games, so that clearly makes sense. 6 of his 7 touchdowns came during that time. So Najee Harris is a different player. But here's what we also want to know. Regardless of his workload going down from the ridiculous 384 touches we had, and most of us predicted in his rookie year, he still had 313 touches last year, despite being spotted in the first half of the season. He had 272 carries and 41 targets. 41 targets is still good. Now, Najee, 78th percentile broken tackle rate. Now, the Steelers this year, I don't know what Kenny Pickett's going to be, but I think he showed some signs of being better than he was early in the season. And if this Steelers passing game can make a little improvement, look at the weapons they have. You got George Pickens, Deontay Johnson. Calvin Austin is flashing great speed in camp. I don't expect anything from Allen Robinson, but as a number 4 in the mix, what the heck? And then Pat Freiermuth. So if they can put together a decent passing game, Najee Harris, unlike when he was a rookie with Ben Roethlisberger and last year when the offense was struggling, Najee Harris could actually see space. And if he can maintain that 78th percentile broken tackle rate, that's a big deal. All right. So now the other thing is their offensive line, they have been building that line for a few years. Last year, it really started to get better, and they drafted Broderick Jones in the first round. So the whole perfect storm for Najee is that a little better passing game, tested defense. Defense can't overstack. The line's a little bit better. Najee is second half. Najee with no foot issue, no steel plate in the shoe. And look, Jaylen Warren's a nice player. But when you're the change of pace in the NFL, there's a lot of benefits to bringing a different style of running. We see it all the time. Guys come in and they play very, very well as the number 2. I don't believe that Jaylen Warren challenges Najee Harris on any other level. I think he's a very fine player. But I just think, so that's my upside case for Najee Harris. And I do think at running back 13, especially you went wide receiver early in your drafts, or if you need a running back too, I think Najee Harris is 80. I think he could get in easily inside the top 10 with the situations. And like I said, the upside cases, if a couple players on top get hurt and he even builds on that, we could see a very fine season on him. Now, earlier, these are 2 players somebody asked about in our chat. So the next player is J.K. Dobbins. Now, again, the upside case for J.K. Dobbins, who is being drafted as the RB22, pick 67. He's going after Javonte Williams and after Rachaad White. Now, I get it. Dobbins has missed time. 2 years ago, the ACL. Now, rookie year, he mostly played. He was eased in. He really did like week 9 or 10. He really didn't get into the mix a lot. But they even spotted his carries then. But then coming off the ACL in 2021, last year he missed games, and then he missed more time later. He wasn't quite right. But remember, down the stretch, he looked really good. He is a star, and I did talk about him a bit earlier. But this is the segment I want to focus on him. So I do wonder if John Harbaugh's plan even from rookie year, was to always limit running back touches. But we don't know. It hasn't been a long enough sample to say that's a necessary truth, right? Last year, and Dobbins said it at points, he was not fully 100%. He plays in 8 games. He still goes for 5.7 yards per carry. Again, on a team where the opposing defenses were loading up to stop the run, and the Ravens were not creative. And a lot of the success that Dobbins had was when Lamar Jackson was out the last 5 games of the season. He was running for 7.48 yards per carry the last 4 games of the season. So now Dobbins with a 58th percentile broken tackle rate, not great, but better than average, right? But if we get a healthy Lamar Jackson, Todd Monken implements 3 receiver sets. I said this earlier. This is the first time in Dobbins' career he's going to have legitimate space to run with the football. And I believe, look, I said it before, very, very true superstar skills in J.K. Dobbins. So this is a player who can be utilized. Now, also, I believe he can be a very strong receiver, but Greg Roman was not about using the screen game to his running backs. Now, there also could be a case made that Lamar Jackson will often run the ball instead of screen it off. But it's also possible Todd Monken has shown the propensity to use design screens in his game. And if you're getting the ball to J.K. Dobbins in the pass game, again, against light boxes, he can make people miss, and he can really do some damage there. So even if he gets to 40 catches, now that might be a stretch. 40 catches is a lot. But let's say he can get to 30. That's going to boost his rushing rate. There is a definite upside case scenario where J.K. Dobbins has an insane season. Now, last player. This player, I'm going to hear me out on this one, because you're going to hear the name and you're going to be like, there is a case to make for Cam Akers having an upside season. Now, Fantasy Mojo has him as the running back 26. Pick 74. He's going after Miles Sanders, Alvin Kamara. That's about right? But here's what you want to talk about. Last year, Akers had a very weird 2022 season. Now, we know in 2021, he tore his Achilles, right? And he did come back for the playoffs. And early in the season, he couldn't get to the line of scrimmage effectively. And it was rough. But he was a completely different runner. Now, the scenario is this. They had tough defenses early in the season. They had easy defenses late in the season. So people could just very easily say, look, when he faced tough defense, he stunk. When he faced, cream puff defenses, he killed them. And that's fair. I totally get it. Now, on the season, he does overall rush for 4.8 yards per carry. Now, again, overall schedule was easy. I'm not going to dispute that for a minute. Now, week 15 through 18 was the real point where the schedule got easy. 3 of 4 games are bottom 10 run defenses. He gets 100 scrimmage yards in each of those games. He had a 3-touchdown game against Denver, and he averaged 5.47 yards per carry. But remember, in Akers' defense, his offensive line was decimated all year. So it wasn't like he was running with a good line against bad defenses. He was running with no line against bad defenses. So you have to give him some credit there. And in those last 4 games, he caught 9 passes. That's significant. And I'm going to go back to some precedent in a minute that shows that might be sustainable. Now, overall, we're going to take the whole year in its entirety. Remember, I don't think Akers was healthy until the middle of the season. I think that Achilles was not better yet. I think he still was trying to work his explosiveness back. He still had a 69th percentile broken tackle rate. Now, the 46th percentile yards after contact, again, I think that was the entirety of the season. It was way better down the stretch. So I think that one was fixable. And then even as a receiver, and this is small sample size, and this is so this number, you could just throw it out, but it's a data point. 94th percentile yards after the catch. That regardless, even if it was 70, it would have been solid. Now, he's had 11 yards per reception as a rookie. He missed the next year with Achilles. He had 9 yards per reception last year. Again, super, super small sample size. So that goes down from there. But he's shown the propensity to be decent as a receiver. Now, based on Sean McVay's comments, we are looking at a 3-down back here. And right now, and I've heard good words on Kyren Williams in camp, but I don't think he's any type of threat. I just don't think there's any threat anywhere, because Cam Akers, we saw when Akers was a rookie, we saw Sean McVay lean into him. Now, I want to talk a little more about the Rams offense. So I mentioned earlier when I talked about Cooper Kupp, but just a little different. So back again when they were challenging for Super Bowls, but not the recent one, but back when they played the Patriots, they had a good balance of run and pass. And again, they had Todd Gurley. I get a different situation. But McVay had a very good orchestrated attack with a good zone run scheme that worked in coordination with the passing game. And it was very well done. They used a lot of motion. They kept defenses off balance. And as I said earlier, McVay just went recently too pass heavy. And they won a Super Bowl. You're not going to argue with Sean McVay. You win a Super Bowl, you did the right thing. But the thing is now, this year, they have to go back to balance. I said earlier in the show, Stafford back and neck injuries the last 2 years. Cooper Kupp, up near 30 years old. And they're going to have to protect their assets at receiver by building a good running game. And I think McVay, I'm sure he's a genius. He works. I'm sure he spent considerable time this offseason realizing how they want to best attack. I said earlier, that offensive line that was horrible last year, they got their players back. It's not like they're world beaters, but they have good, decent talent. They could be a middle of the pack line. They definitely can do that. And then drafting Steve Avila, the massive guard at the 5th pick of the 2nd round, that's also going to help them with the run game as well. So I do think that Cam Akers is going to have expanded usage. I believe he's going to be their 3-down back. And I want to point back to 2020. This is the last time before last season that Akers was used as a bell cow. Remember, he tore his Achilles in 2021. In the last 5 games, he averaged 23 carries and 2.6 targets per game. Doesn't sound like a big number at 2.6, but it's substantial. It's still for what he was. And that type of workload, if Akers has better blocking, better scheme, and he plays anywhere near the way he played at the end of the season, I do think Cam Akers could be a steal at his ADP. So let me see here. Lee, any thoughts on Higbee? So Tyler Higbee last year, here's what I saw as I was watching the games. Tyler Higbee was an emergency dump-off option on a lot of plays. Basically, they were down to some backup quarterbacks at differing points. And basically, he was just kind of blocking, stepping back, and then he was an outlet when the play had nothing to go with. And Higbee, I believe he's 30 now. And I do like the production he had last year. But I think the way the offense, as long as Kupp is healthy, Higbee's targets are going to be suppressed. Now, he'll be a part of it for sure. But with Higbee, I have him about tight end 18. I think that volume was unsustainable. And remember, he was really up and down, too. I just don't think what he had last year is going to be part of the offensive philosophy of this year. And so he's a good player. I just don't see him being anything strong there. Let's see here. Uncle Ted, the only thing I'll say about Roschon Johnson is I'm going to take this from the Bears organization's mouths. When the Bears drafted him, when you draft a player, this is your moment. You come out and you say what you love about a player, about his running ability, player's receiving ability. They didn't talk about that at all. They said, wow, what a great leader. Second thing they said, he can really play on special teams. The third thing they said, he could block a bit. They mentioned nothing about him as a runner. And to me, he's a culture setter. Could I be wrong? Of course. I have no monopoly on the truth. But the Bears organization spoke nothing of him as a runner. They spoke about him being a core part of the organization that's growing. Maybe I'm wrong, but I always put stock into what they say because that is the moment where they can say glowing things about players and nobody cares if they're wrong. Let's see here. Got time here. And so, yeah, the Khalil Herbert thing's interesting. So he's listed as the RB1 right now in Chicago. And the question I have is this. So, if a guy looks great in the preseason, throw it out. The preseason means absolutely nothing. Defenses do not game plan. Defenses just line up. They put subs on the field. There is no game planning at all. So players should look good. Everybody should look good in the preseason game. Just so you know that, let's get that off the table. Preseason means nothing. Hey, we got Darren here, so I'm going to bring Darren here. Oh, Darren Armani, so good to see you after seeing you at the Fantasy Football Expo and the Kings Classic last weekend. Darren is the Pros versus Joe's draft creator. He is my go-to and the number one source of ADP data since 2011. You hear me say Fantasy Mojo every show 8 times. Everybody hears that name. They probably say it in their sleep, Darren. Darren won the 2018 Kings Classic. He also, last year, he won the hard way FFPC. He was the champ there. And you need to be following Darren at Fantasy Mojo. Darren, tell everybody how things are going today.
Awesome, Jim. I just heard you say Tyler Higbee was your tight end 18. His ADP is, I think he's tight end 8. So You're not getting any Higbee.
No, I'm not getting any Higbee. Yeah. Last year I just saw him getting a lot of these. They were dump off screens to save the quarterback's neck. And I think when people look at stats, they're like, yeah, Higbee's. And I think people see there's like a lot of lack of depth at receiver. I get it. Yeah, I'm out on Higbee. I think that we had that one spell about 5 years ago, and then last year we had that little spell where they just dumped him off. But he wasn't really like running a lot of legit routes, so I'm just a little bit off on him.
Yeah.
But are you in on Higbee at all?
I have a lot of Higbee.
I hope you're right. I hope you're right on him, man.
He's like a tournament winner, that guy. I mean, if you look at the end of the season, for whatever reason, the guy kind of just evolves and shows up, and he's helping people win leagues at the end of the year. Now, if he's not, you got to get to the sprint at the end of the year, and maybe that's where maybe you sour on him a little bit. But he's one of those guys like Akers too. You're talking about Akers. Akers is a guy who was like non-existent, and then he was RB4 over the weeks 15 through 17. So recency bias can also influence people's drafting the following season too. So maybe it's a little bit of that influencing my Higbee perspective.
Well, it certainly has an influence to Cam Akers drafting because nobody seems to like Cam Akers very much. So that's pretty funny. Darren, you're going to tell us today about 4 players who you like, and you tell us why you like these players in fantasy drafts. So a lot of fantasy players are in 2 quarterback leagues where they need a strong second quarterback. Some people miss out on the early run of quarterbacks, and they need somebody to get in there and be productive for them as their number one. Quarterback 13 per your ADP off the board is Kirk Cousins. Tell people why they should be paying attention to Kirk Cousins this season.
Yeah, so, and just to preface this, a lot of my perspective comes from draft strategy. So I'm not just doing it, player talent in a vacuum. It's like, how does this player fit into your leagues, where you can get him in a particular draft, whatnot, and over the course of the season, what he's going to do for you. So Kirk Cousins, the first thing is he's tied to the most elite receiver in the game, right? So if you're somebody who believes in the stacking philosophy, it's a very cheap stack for you to get Cousins and Jefferson, right? He was quarterback 6 last year in terms of points scored. So he's being drafted. This is like the opposite of Higbee. So he's QB 13 in drafts right now, but he performed as QB 6 last year. I don't see that changing too much. Like maybe deferred maybe to the downside a little bit, but still he's tied to Jefferson. Another big thing with Kirk Cousins is the guy never gets hurt. He plays the whole season. He's a very safe pick. He has a very high floor. And for that reasons, if I'm not hitting one of the elite quarterbacks in a draft, Kirk Cousins is the guy I'm targeting. So, he's like buying IBM shares, right? You know what you're going to get every year.
I love that analogy. And Darren, last year the defense was bad. I projected to be where Zadarius Smith is gone. They do bring back Danielle Hunter, but without the 1-2, that kind of falls off. The cornerback play, they had like Duke Shelley had a season out of nowhere, but he's gone. I just don't think they can cover. I think they're going to really struggle to rush, especially with Hunter being another year older. The run defense is great, but nobody cares because who's going to run on you if you can throw all day, right? So I think you're right. Kirk Cousins is going to have to throw. Real quick, what do you think about Cousins having the combination of Hockenson and Jordan Addison as well?
I mean, I love Hockenson, and early on in the draft season, I was drafting Hockenson ahead of Andrews, and that's great for Kirk Cousins too. I mean, even Osborne, like he's got a great receiving core to go to now. It's not just Jefferson, right? So now he's got. They never really utilized that tight end too much before Hockenson came. So now it kind of like it opened up another avenue of their game. So he's got all these weapons to work with. So it's just feeding into the positive sort of vibe I'm getting about Kirk Cousins.
And the last thing I'll add to support Darren's argument, the offensive tackles are really, really good. And that's going to help when they're trailing and teams want to bring an edge rush at Cousins. That's going to give them a little extra time to operate. So very excited for Cousins. Darren, the next player, Tampa Bay Buccaneer, you're looking for a running back outside the top 15, maybe pick 64 per Fantasy Mojo ADP. Why are you high on Rachaad White this season?
Yeah, so he's going, his ADP right now is 606. As you mentioned, he doesn't really have any competition on the team. He's got Vaughn, Edmonds. Sean Tucker is kind of interesting, right? Because he's a bit of an unknown. But there's really with Fournette out of there, he's got it all to himself. So he caught 50 balls last year. He's a good pass catching back. No Tom Brady this year throwing the ball, but I still think he's going to be in that range of 50 balls. That 6-7 round, that range that I'm seeing there, Madison, Pierce, James Cook, Rachaad White, that is like a sweet spot in drafts right now. If you're going 0 RB, or if you want to go hero RB and pick somebody up late, I could definitely see, maybe one or two of those guys in that range finishing in the top 12 for the year. And Rachaad White is one of the probably guys at the top of that list for me. That's the kind of guy who you want, who's going to do it, catching the ball and running the ball as well. So it's a good profile for him.
You're so right about that zone of the draft too. I mean, people like White, you said people like Cook, there are a number of attractive backs in that area, and it allows you flexibility in your draft strategy if you're thinking a few moves ahead, but certainly you could plan a draft to attack running backs there. And like Darren said, if you're on Rachaad White, that may be a big ticket for your season to make that move. Darren, the next thing, we're going to go to Kansas City, and Patrick Mahomes is insane. He loses Tyreek Hill, and yet he still is like by far the best. I did not see that coming. Now, Andy Reid's offense can be very difficult for young receivers to learn, especially slot receivers. That makes me very interested to hear why you're in on Skyy Moore this year, who is in his second year. He had a year to learn. He's going off as wide receiver 45 at about 94 picks into a draft.
Right. So he's going, the ADP on him right now is 808. And, with Kansas City, it's Travis Kelce and then it's everybody else. So really you're trying to solve that puzzle of among everybody else, who's going to be the guy to get. And maybe it's not one particular guy, but they're going to probably be similar, but who's going to be at the top of that list? So what do we know about MVS? He's not really the go-to guy. He's a deep threat. He's inconsistent. So I kind of toss him out as not being like the guy I would want every week. If I get I'm thinking like from that, if it's not Kelce, maybe I'm going to get a wide receiver, a low WR2 or a WR3, and Skyy Moore's the pick. Kadarius Toney, that guy, he just it's not working for him for a variety of reasons. He's got bad luck or whatever, but it's this injury after injury with this guy. Kind of reminds me of like Josh Gordon, like incredible talent, but just doesn't, he can't stay on the field for a variety of reasons. So, and then good vibes. Like even last night, I read that he was on the field for 100% of the snaps in 12 personnel. So he's the guy. Now people might get, you got to be careful watching preseason. So Rashee Rice had like a great game, but it can be very like, you got to like not pay attention to that stuff so much. Cause it's going to be Skyy Moore and it's going to be MVS. Those are the guys who are guaranteed spots. Kadarius Toney, if he's healthy. So, it just, and with Andy Reid, like if you know his history of how he treats players in the preseason, so I'm an Eagles guy. So I like watching Andy Reid and what he did with his players in the preseason. Like there would be guys that would come out and just super shine. Like if you remember the one year Raheem Mostert led the NFL in rushing in the preseason, and then they end up cutting the guy.
Yes,
so don't don't pay too much attention to what's going on in those teams in the preseason.
Go ahead, Darren. Keep going.
Yeah, but so Skyy Moore he's my pick. It's a little bit of a flag plant, but so I've been drafting him heavily, and even out in in Canton for the Kings Classic. I drafted him in my snake draft, so I'm kind of in on him. But again, it's just he's not going to be a WR1, but should be hopefully a solid WR2, WR3 for you.
Yeah, it's fantastic value. And Darren brought up many, many good points. And just remember, Andy Reid's offense is not easy. There's a lot of nuances in the area of the field, especially the interior where Moore plays. And it's just a lot to take in for a young receiver. We think of Andy Reid and all the success, but it's built on a lot of tough principles. And that's why defenses have had such hard times figuring them out over the years, not just with Patrick Mahomes, but back to the days in Philly. Very, very smart coach. Now we have one more. And I love this because this is a player I'm high on. So I always want to hear somebody else's take. Look, a lot of the leagues you're in, tight end premium league, there may be depth of rosters where you need a second tight end. And I think that his ADP has gone up, Darren. If you want to talk about that for a minute, too. Talk about Jake Ferguson and how you've seen his ADP move over the preseason.
Yeah, so, I mean, I was loading up on Jake Ferguson.
Yep.
Up until July, I mean, I was grabbing him everywhere. Now it's between him and Luke Musgrave. It's tough for me to get shares of these guys anymore. But it's more of a process thing. That Dallas tight end position with Dak Prescott, it's just a honeypot of production, like year after year after year. So 2022, it was a tight end 9, 2021, tight end 3, 2020, tight end 9, 2019, going back to Jason Witten, tight end. It's just like, it's an easy call to grab the Dallas tight end late in your drafts. Ferguson was rested, right, in the last game. So he's the starter. But like you said, people have caught on to him. His ADP right now is in the 13th round. It's 1305. But even there, I like, you can't just look at the single ADP data point. Sometimes you got to look at like the range. So one of the cool things we have at Fantasy Mojo is like, if you go to our ADP charts, you click on the player's name and you see the scatter plot and it shows where all the picks are. So even 1305 is the average. You could see he could go anywhere between like the 11th round and the 15th round. So you have to know like that. What is that range of outcomes when I'm drafting these guys? But even at this current price, I mean, it's a solid. If you want to go late tight end, that's still a reasonable bet, especially in a tight end premium. If you're playing that, I think I got him in a Scott Fishbowl too. That was still early on before people were jumping on him. But yeah, Dallas tight end every year until they prove me wrong. I'm just going there year after year.
Yeah, and like you, Darren, I was 19th round, 20th round. I was scooping up late Jake Ferguson early in draft season. And like you, I'll still target him because I do think he has a very good chance of being a tight end one. Limited sample size last year, but he was 79th percentile yards after catch. Dalton Schultz was a catch and fall guy. Real quick. So how much of Dalton Schultz's production was a product of Dak Prescott? Because people are really high on him going into Houston. And I'm like, he's a catch and fall guy and he doesn't have Dak Prescott. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's aligned with what I'm saying about the Dallas tight end position. Prescott, he loves to go to the tight end. So, he cashed in on it. He's over in Houston, but we'll see what they can do with him. I wouldn't expect the same thing. I mean, nope. So if I'm in a draft, then I got to pick between Dalton Schultz and in Houston, and what's his ADP? Let me see real quick. Dalton Schultz.
He's got to be tight end 12.
Right. He's been going up too. Dalton Schultz, yeah, tight end 12. You're right, 9-12. So you talk like a 4-round difference. I'm probably just going to wait. I'll pass on him, and then wait for like a Jake Ferguson type in that range. And I really like him. I mean, the other ones around him, Juwan Johnson, Irv Smith, Tyler Conklin. I mean, if I see Jake Ferguson in that mix, I'm taking Jake Ferguson every time.
All day long. Yeah. Love it, Darren. Darren, before we close you out and you tell us what's going on, I do have a question, and it's about Philly. And I know you're connected to Philly really well. You know all the teams, but you're definitely connected with Philly. So Lee Ving's asking, Eagles backfield split. How are you breaking this backfield down? Then I'll close you out.
It's a different animal every week. I still think, like, even though Gainwell was kind of getting hyped as the like the lead back, I mean, there really is no lead back there. It's a situational thing. They're going to use all of their backs, and I'm really only targeting these guys in best ball for the most part, right? Swift is probably the guy who has the most talent. You know, he's the best pass catcher. Penny's probably the best runner of the three. Gainwell's like a utility guy. I can't see Gainwell in any kind of like a lead back role. He's just not built for that. He did great at the end of the year last year, but you know, they brought in Swift and Penny too with Gainwell there. I mean, and they let Miles Sanders go. So I mean, that tells you too. It's they use all the backs. There's no dominant back.
Yeah, and I'm like you. I had Swift decently high on my draft board, and I just keep moving him down for again for managed leagues, not best ball where I've set a lineup because I just don't know when I'm going to click him in as a lineup starter, and I'm just nervous. So yeah, I keep moving him down. Darren, tell everybody what you have going on, especially Fantasy Mojo, so everybody can keep up with you and follow what you got going on.
Right. So fantasymojo.com, and I say we are the go-to source for high stakes ADP. The sharpest players in the game play over there. They start drafting in January, right? Even before the Super Bowl starts, they're already kicking up leagues. So it's very sharp ADP. There isn't a lot of dead money over there. So it'll differ very much for like if you go like Underdog or like DraftKings or something like that. It's a lot tighter than that. So we have all sorts of ADP for that. We have a lot of people like that. We publish every draft board that's done online by the FFPC. So you can come in the morning and like look at the drafts, which people will spend their mornings doing that. Another cool thing coming up, and it's starting to become a hot topic, is waiver wire data. People want to know. They're already asking, what am I going to bid on Luke Musgrave when the waiver wire opens up the first week? Because he wasn't drafted early on. Now he's a 13th round pick, but he's undrafted in 25% of leagues. So we have waiver wire history from maybe 5-6 years back. You go to our waiver wires from last year and you can see what the bids were on a particular player. You can it's like doing price comps on buying houses is what I associate it with. So that's a real cool thing. Just analysis. I tell people just go to the front page. There's a virtual tour and it'll run you through like the top 12 features of the site. And people get, if they're playing, if you're thinking about playing high stakes, it's generally considered the premier source of that information.
Yeah, and like you hear me on XM, you hear me in this show. It is my go-to. I don't deviate, and I love Darren how I'll get the last few days ADP because that's micro ADP. Right. That when a player's like hurt, we want to know what that ADP is today. It doesn't do me any good to know the ADP from the last month, even the last week. Like when Dalvin Cook signs, well, within a few days, I want to know where that's settling in. And that's of all the benefits of what Darren has at Fantasy Mojo, for me personally, that's a big one for me. Darren, I appreciate you and thank you for talking football with me today. I'd like to thank everyone out there for joining us. Please join me again Monday, 11 a.m. on RotoWire YouTube or wherever you're watching right now. My guest will be outstanding fantasy analyst and friend JL Garofolo. Have a great day, everyone.